listening to the Marketing Personalities Podcast, a podcast for growth-minded entrepreneurs that serves up valuable insight and interviews about aligning your marketing strategy with your personality type. Because here's the deal. You shouldn't have to feel fake and salesy in order to grow your business. And you no longer have to. Your marketing strategy can feel good to implement and it can work. You can attract the right clients and customers to your business and grow your profits, all while staying true to who you naturally are. So in the name of honest business growth, bring your unique talents, perspectives, and personality to the table. And join us on this week's podcast episode to discover marketing that feels good for you. Welcome back to another episode of the Marketing Personalities Podcast. I'm Brit Kolo, and I'm here today with Maggie Patterson, who is the founder of Scoob Studios and Small Business Boss. Maggie, thank you so much for being here.
I'm super excited to be back on the show and to talk about all my marketing personalities.
Yeah. So Maggie was originally on the podcast back when we were under the Marketing and Yoga Pants brand. And now she is back. And we're going to be discussing how understanding your marketing personality type can help you do marketing, business, and life better. And Maggie's going to give us some really great examples of how she's seen this to be true in her own life as an INTJ. And that's kind of where that joke comes from, all of her marketing personality types and what's coming in, because the INTJ tends to have just some really interesting things going on to where they're just so capable. I'm getting ahead of myself now, but they're just so capable. And so she might have lots of things going on in how she does marketing, business, life, and we're going to dig into all of it. But before we do, you've got to get to know Maggie and what's going on. So Maggie, tell us about your entrepreneurial life right now. What do you have your hands in?
So I have my hands in two things: Scoob Studios, which is content marketing agency, and I'm the founder of that agency. And I work with my team on, all things content marketing, but we work mainly with tech and professional services companies, larger companies. So we are an extension of their team, helping them get all the things they need to get done. And then in my spare time, I am over at Small Business Boss, where we have the Small Business Boss podcast, and I run a year-long mastermind for service business owners who are really focused on growing their businesses in a way that is around delivering services. So, not worrying about courses or membership or anything else, really on that, how do I, find, book, and serve my clients piece of things.
Very cool. Okay. So the last time we spoke on the podcast, we just spoke about Scoob. Like that was the main part of our conversation, your content marketing agency. What brought in Small Business Boss? What made you kind of say, hey, in all this spare time I have, what made you say, hey, I want to go create this content through a podcast and create this other type of offering for these small business owners?
So, that really happened organically because over the years, I am the type of person, my business has evolved many times and changed and morphed. And I was at that point, and that was early 2016 when, we kind of were like, oh, we're going to focus on doing some mentoring here, because I was consistently being asked by my peers, by business friends, by people in our audience, like, how have you built your business? Like, I don't understand how you're doing this. And I had dipped my toe in the world of courses. And I was like, this isn't really my thing. I like that really personalized connection. I like being able to see people make progress in their business. And I was actually, we're going to get all meta, but I was at a mastermind retreat, and my business partner and I at the time were talking about, what's kind of the next evolution of what we're doing. We're not really feeling the course thing. We don't want to be just doing the agency. Spoiler alert, she was an INTJ as well. And they just looked at us and they're like, why aren't you teaching people how to run a service business? Because at the time, no one was really serving that market. And it is something that I have personally been able to do really, really successfully for my entire career. So I was like, maybe there's something here. And over time, 3.5 years later, that has really built into what Small Business Boss is today, and really focusing on delivering a mastermind that is focused specifically for that audience of people.
Yeah, yeah, because that's a whole other thing, right? Like that one type of model, there's so much to dig into just in that one model. And I have to kind of point out it is a little rebellious to go that down that route, being that the catchy trendy thing to do is scale, make the course, make the scalable offer, make the something outside of the services. So I think it's kind of funny that you said, well, there's a lot of value over here, and I'm going to serve these people. Very cool.
Well, what's interesting about that though, Brit, is at the time it was super rebellious. And now I'm seeing, and I actually just published a blog post on this today, is I'm seeing more and more people circle back to that business model. I'm seeing more and more people teaching that business model. And so of course, now me in my rebellious way, I was like, where were you 3 years ago? And FYI, you can teach beginner service business owners. I'll be over here with the people who want to build an agency, because that I feel is like a market that's not being addressed appropriately now.
Yeah. Yeah. See that visionary, right? You've got that picture of what it's going to be like and you go that way. That's so good. So, okay. So we've kind of hinted at a little pieces of this INTJ personality type, but I'm going to give the listeners, if they aren't an INTJ, maybe they are, but they're just learning about this and what it all means, or they just haven't listened to any of the other podcast episodes with an INTJ guest, I'll give kind of like this overview. So there's a lot to every personality type. And I say this every time, right? There's a lot to every personality type. I'm not going to give you point by point all the millions of things we know about INTJs and what they tend to prefer. But here's just a few things. They tend to be pretty logic driven, right? They make decisions from thought and data. And so logic helps. When they get to see something from data rather than how they feel, they would rather make a decision from that. They have to have a plan, a strategy. Like without a strategy in place, they're not going to give their best energy to the project. In that kind of perspective, they also tend to be the one driving the strategy and coming up with it because they're exceptionally skilled at seeing the big picture and being the kind of person to be able to say, okay, if that's where we're going, let's chunk this down and get it into manageable steps. So they're even the most visionary INTJs still have that really interesting skill of being able to chunk down the big vision that they have into those actionable bite-sized steps. Not all visionaries have that. INTJ visionaries do tend to have that. They also are the most rebellious of types. And this is anytime you read about INTJs, this tends to be the trend because it's so clear that they're always questioning. And through their questioning of things, they often find better ways to do things. They don't accept the status quo. And in fact, they might notice a status quo trend situation happening, and their most natural response to that is, yeah, no, that's not for me. I'm going to go find a better way, or something along those lines. So that's a little peek into the INTJ personality type. Would you add anything to that, Maggie? Is there anything else that you really want the listener to know about your type?
I think the one thing that's been really interesting for me as an INTJ, and then having clients, a lot of my clients are INTJs. So I feel like that combination you're talking about of that rebelliousness with the strategy and the logical thinking makes for a really unique entrepreneur. And I feel like a lot of the people I encounter for whatever reason are INTJ entrepreneurs.
Yeah, that is interesting. I would have to dig into why, but I would have to imagine. Well, I see this in my own audience too, regardless of even in what I do, I speak to all 16 types, or I try to, but there's still going to be that personal, natural bias that I'm going to put, how I write things, how I speak about things, the words I just naturally use are going to lean more toward my intuitive feeling self, the ENFJ. And so that's probably going to appeal to, not trying to do it, but probably appeal to people in my tribe. Whereas for you, you're going to be naturally using words, phrases, ways of going about things that are you. And that's going to naturally, if somebody wants to build a business, like you've built a business, and they appreciate how you've done that, 9 times out of 10, well, maybe not 9 times out of 10, that's fake a fake data point, but a lot of the times they're probably going to be similar to you in how they look at the world and what they prefer. So that makes some sense. So let's talk about your type. Since learning you were an INTJ, what has become more clear to you in just everyday life and how you relate to others? How does that come up?
I think one of the things is I'm very, and I mean, this goes back like literally as long as I can remember, I'm very direct. So, but I'm also like, I'm a professional communicator. Like my job is to give feedback and to collaborate with people and take what they're saying. So that directness isn't always, it's appreciated, but I have to really work actively on an ongoing basis to think about my delivery and how am I going to do this in a way that's in service, not just of the way I would like to deliver it or the way I would like to receive it. So the perfect example is there was this debate in the mastermind group I host about how do you terminate an employee? And I was like, I just said, I'm just going to say, guys, this is my total INTJ, but like, please don't terminate me face to face. I want time to think about it first. So send me an email if you're going to terminate me. So, understanding that for my team, understanding that for my clients, sometimes there's going to have to be some flexibility in how I'm going to deliver the feedback. How am I, I'm going to have to give them details that I might not actually find particularly helpful or useful. And I'm going to have to add this level of, I have to fluff things up. Like I write the email and I'm like, okay, it's one email, it's one line. and it's not that I don't care. It's just that I'm ultra efficient and I just don't want to waste people's time. So I always have to go back and be like, okay, let's fluff this up. The perfect example is with my number 2, who's an INFJ. I started giving her feedback in a really particular way with like videos and stuff. And I finally went to her and I was like, do you like this? She's like, I love it. And I was like, oh my God, I would hate this. But, really trying to find the ways that are going to work for everybody and not just keep me in this very like logical kind of linear way of thinking where I'm like, that's just extraneous detail. No one wants that.
That's interesting. So I'm curious how that might have evolved over the years. And I'm not sure of your startup story, but when you were more of a 1 or 2 person team, maybe you weren't working with a bunch of people all at once, so you were only communicating with a few people. Do you feel like that has been a skill that you've had to develop over time as your company has become larger and you've had to interface with more people?
Yeah, I think the more clients to have, the bigger our team gets, is I really have to go back to, how do I want this to feel for the other person? And I'm always checking in on that because those skills are essentially what means success or failure for my company. If I speak to my clients in a way that's inappropriate or too direct or not taking into account all these other things and not approaching with empathy, I'm not going to have a business for very long. So I think as we grow in my leadership style and even in my communication style with clients, I try to just really put that at the forefront. And I'm not going to lie, like some days, especially if I'm stressed out or I'm feeling crunched for time, I'm kind of like, oh, why do I have to do this? But I know ultimately, like, it's not what I want to necessarily do, but it's in what's in best service of the company. And I think that's the thing I always have to go back to is like, what's best for the company, not what's best for me in this moment when I'm not feeling it.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever find that maybe you've been surprised before where maybe you were being kind of direct and more natural in your communication, let's say with a team member or a paying client, and they actually really appreciated that, like that natural, just like directness, a little bit more INTJ, less feeling more logic behind it? Does that ever kind of come up and kind of surprise you? Like, oh, like it's okay with some people.
Yeah. And, I think it's always that marriage of like, I try to be true to the directness of like, I'm not going to, go on for half an hour and give you all these hugs and accolades. I'm going to like give you the compliment and then like cut to the chase. So I think there's always kind of that balance of the directness with the other thing. And I think one thing I hear a lot from clients and I hear it from my team, they appreciate I'm not going to waste their time. They value that I'm very like, there's no fluff. I'm just going to cut right to it and be like, okay, so here's what's going on. Do I think about my delivery? Yes. But do I completely like try to put in flowers and rainbows and unicorns around it if it's not that way? Absolutely not. And
No.
I think one of the things that's made me really good with clients over the years is like that when there is the difficult conversation to have, I literally will say like, listen, I know you don't want to hear this, but I would be remiss and this is what you're paying me for. So here it goes. Like, and also coming to the table with a solution, not just being like, oh, here's the problem, boom.
Yeah.
And that was something I had to learn very, very early on in my career is like, I am in the solutions business. I'm not in the, I'm going to point out problems business.
Oh, okay. Okay. So yeah, we've kind of talked about some parts of the journey a little bit. And you said a little while back that, over the years, you've made several pivots, tried a bunch of things. I'm sure some things worked, some things didn't. Can you take us into your thought process and your decision-making process when you are looking at the possibilities and the potential? Maybe you have a new idea or someone brings a new idea your way and you're kind of trying to figure out like, is it worth making this shift or this pivot to try this thing out? How do you do that? Like, what does that look like for you?
So I always approach everything with this kind of experimental mindset is, well, if I'm not entirely sure, and sometimes I can look at things through experience or, the data available and be like, okay, yeah, I think this is a really solid idea. I think there's other times when I may not have that data and I'm just, it's kind of a best guess. So I commit to the experiment but that experiment is always with a very well-reasoned plan. It's got to be contained and there's got to be an endpoint. Because I think one of the things it's really, really easy to do, especially like, yeah, I'm an INTJ and I'm a bit of a rebel, but I'm also a creative. So like all those things together can become a hot mess without a plan. So, like if we're going to do an experiment, like what is the end point? How are we measuring success? What are the actions going in? How many resources are we going to dedicate to this? Because without those things, without those kind of rails or a container, it's really easy to get things out of control. And there are times when I really rely on my team to say, you know what? Like your rebellion is now out of control. Like you are literally just creating a project to try to prove a point.
Oh,
like,
let's talk about that. Okay. I can see, I can totally understand this. So how would you create a project to make a point? Like, give me an example.
Okay, so I have a lot of opinions, like a lot of opinions, and I'm very, very curious. So I tend to spend a lot of time researching and trying to put things together and trying to figure out what things are going on. And like, because we work in an industry that's so riddled with so many, like, I'm a lifelong marketer and communicator. So I see so many things that are just wrong. And I literally could spend all day, every day, like on my soapbox, talking about these problems and proposing all the solutions. And I've had to learn for me, like, A, that's not what your business is. And B, like, this is not productive. So not every issue is for me to get out there and be a crusader on. So I have to look at things very critically. I'm like, I can start to kind of feel myself. I'm like, oh, I've got things to say. I'm like, nope, you don't have to say it about this. Because I used to want, like, I have to resist the urge to just jump in and like share my opinion on everything, because sometimes that opinion is not helpful for the business. Sometimes that's not adding to the conversation. And sometimes it's just not a good use of my time. So putting some of those kind of boundaries in place and also having my team keep me accountable, because they're like, literally, like, Maggie, you don't have time for this. And it's not driving the 4 goals you've stated for the quarter ahead. So what are you doing?
Yeah, I can totally appreciate that. Okay, so let's talk about marketing now. So you've tapped into your marketing personality type results. What have you realized about your best marketing strategy now that you know a little bit more about how your INTJ-ness can apply to marketing? What have you realized? What have been some of the ahas?
So I think the first thing is that rebelliousness. I think that rebelliousness where I'm able to look at something and go, yeah, in the cases where it is for me or it is related to the business, that I can use that as a superpower and asset to say, hey, here's what I see happening. By the way, I'll be over here if you want to join me. So I think in terms of building community, I think I've done a reasonably good job of being like putting a stake in the ground and standing for something, and people knowing if they're going to do business with me, what that looks like. And I think that's very true for both the agency and small business boss, because we are very, very clear on what our promise is. So I think there's that. I also think marketing wise is understanding that, yes, we're going to be doing marketing. We are marketers. That's what we do on a day-to-day basis. But whether it's for ourselves or for a client, there needs to be a cohesive plan, because nothing will literally irk me more than the lack of a plan or no clear path ahead. Like, great, we're doing this, but what's the actual goal for this? How are we going to measure this? Like, I have to ask clients a lot of questions, because a lot of times our clients won't even have those things in mind. I'm like, when you hire us, we are part of your marketing department. So like, where's the plan? What are we doing and why?
Mm-hmm.
So I think understanding from a marketing perspective how the pieces fit together and what the end game is, instead of just being like, oh, we're going to post on Instagram every day and see what happens. Ooh, no, absolutely not.
Did you ever get kind of pushback about that before, maybe earlier on, where you might not have known how important that strategy was for you? I mean, maybe you knew it internally, but maybe you didn't have the words for it. Now you recognize, like, no, this is, like you just said, a cohesive plan is a must. Like, we're not skipping over that. So had you ever gotten kind of like pushback against that? And are you able to maybe handle that a little bit differently now?
Absolutely. So I think, I do get pushback. I get pushback all the time on it. And I just have to push back on that to say, like, it's really hard for me to do what you've engaged us to do. It's really hard for me and my team to execute that when we don't have the full parameters, when we don't have an accurate picture. So the line I use a lot with clients, and it is very direct and they don't like to hear it, but like, we're only as good as the data you provide us. So I can't measure these things if you don't speak to us. But if you're not transparent about what the plan is, we're only going to be, a fraction of how successful as we could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and that kind of feels like you're basically underlining the way a company that you are the founder and leader and CEO of, that's got to be the way you go about this. Because I'm sure that there are, content marketing agencies that on paper, quote unquote, do what you do. But if they're not led by someone who thinks and acts like you, that might not matter so much to them. But one of the true values of working with your agency is that, this is how we run. Like, the plan and the data, that's all going to be at the foundation of what we do. And without it, we can't really do what we do. So makes total logical sense to me, but not everybody does it that way.
No, and we are very big on, like, the process we use is very simple. And like, we will get new clients who try to like say, oh, we don't need to do, like, big part of, like, if we're going to create content, we do an outline first, because we want them to sign off on that from the get-go so that there's no time wasted later. And people would try to resist the process, but ultimately the process is there for them and for us so that everyone is doing the best possible work. So, that makes everyone's else life simpler. And what's funny is clients, that's what they come back to us later. Like, I work with 2 other agencies and you have no idea how much we like you the best. We're called the favorite agency all the time. And it's because we literally understand that our role is to make their lives simpler, and we do everything we can on a day-to-day basis to make that happen within, the structures we set out.
Yeah, that's perfect. System, process, have the plan, have the strategy, and work it. So as it relates to marketing your agency, Scoob, or marketing Small Business Boss, how has your marketing strategies for your companies changed, shifted, been adjusted, been elevated since finding out what your marketing personality type is as an INTJ?
So it's funny. It gave me, especially like when I got my hands on that report, Brit, I was like, like, one of the recommendations was Twitter is like, I don't love Twitter, but I like where this is going, like about the pace, everything else. So I think a lot of it for me has been, especially with Small Business Boss, looking at, okay, here's what's working. Here's what I actually like to do. And working with my team to be like, okay, so what pieces can we systematize and can we do a better job of that I don't need to be hand holding? And then really giving me, from a marketing perspective, kind of that freedom to have my acts of rebellion and do things the way I want to be doing them. So I know, hey, the baseline stuff is covered. It's happening no matter what. So if you want to go off the grid for a week, Maggie, the world hasn't ended. And also just giving me the freedom to, I think the big thing for me is I really want the people, especially in the small business boss community, I really want them to feel connected. I want them to feel served. And I want to have the space to be able to do that. I know a lot of INTJs want to be hands off. I want to be super hands on.
That's interesting. So you want to be in there with your members. Have you always felt like you wanted to be really in there and kind of the face of your brand externally when it comes to your audience? Or does that feel different?
It does feel different. So I think it's interesting because I've thought about this a lot lately is in marketing, especially in the online world, what we see is a lot of people they're performing as their brand and they really just it's like, here's my grand performance of my brand. So I've been like, I don't have energy for that. So, I mean, for me, if someone else could be the face of the brand and I could do the stuff behind the scenes, I'd probably be totally okay with that, to be honest, because I want to work with people in a much more deep way. And the idea of masses of people knowing things about me and me not knowing them, doesn't really appeal to me. But so I think there's been a navigation of this is the work I do externally, and I do it in a way that is not feeling like a performance. It feels very much just like this is who I am, take it or leave it. So that can let me do the work, kind of behind the scenes in a more connected way with people.
Okay. That's a really helpful. I can kind of feel how helpful that will be for some of the INTJs to hear, because I've heard that before. It's like, well, it's not like I just want to completely be automated and never get to speak with my clients or my customers. I still see the value in being connected with them, but I don't necessarily want or need to be in connection with all of my thousands of followers or, out there constantly connected with my grander audience. Whereas other types are like, yes, give me the whole audience. Like, I just want to connect with all of them. INTJ, not so much that way. But once it comes to the paying clients and customers, there could be a desire to be truly, deeply, directly connected with them. And that's a different thing. So that's a good thing to kind of delineate. Okay, so tell me about this. You mentioned before the interview that you've realized that sometimes your rebellious tendencies could make you rebel against something that could actually work for you and your marketing and your business strategy. So tell me more about that. You're like giggling already. How could that happen?
Well, I feel like being an INTJ some days is the ultimate contradiction because you're visionary. And then, I mean, if you're creative, but you're very logical, linear, it's very stressful in here as an INTJ. So I think sometimes, the data will say one thing, but your rebellious nature will be like, but what if? And I think because there is that questioning that always goes on and that kind of yearning to always dig one layer deeper and then another layer. It's like you can't leave it alone. You get very, very singular focus on things. And I think you want to know why things are the way they are. So even if the data says one thing, you might be like, but I'm smarter than the data. So I think the perfect example, and I was talking about this last week with someone, is, early stages of this version of my business. I had been very, very successful with services, serving a very specific audience. And I was like, well, this course thing, I think it can really work. And I mean, I'm a digital marketer. I know the numbers. I know how things work. Yet I knew what the data said, but I needed to prove it out myself. I needed to see it. And you know what? The data did prove out exactly that it was not the right fit for me. It was not the right fit financially. It was not the right fit in terms of the needs of what I want from my business. Yet I didn't listen to the data from the get-go. So I kept trying different things. And then eventually I was like, Maggie Patterson, get it together. You like working with people. You know what works for you. You know what the data says here because you don't want to do those kinds of activities. So get it together. And that's why we are here today.
So your rebellion can come in any angle. Like maybe you find something that here's an example that I do get from INTJs pretty regularly. I think I've spoken about it enough on the podcast and in emails. So it happens a little less regularly now, but especially in the beginning, I would get emails or messages from INTJs who would find their marketing personality type and what their best marketing strategy was. And immediately, as in like the very first email they received from me, they would hit reply and they'd be like, this isn't right. Like, I think you have this all wrong. I'm actually like really good at all these things that you say that aren't for me. And like, no, I don't think that any of this is right. And I totally get it. And sometimes maybe I'm not right for every single INTJ out there, but it started to become a trend. Like the very first person that was going to be like, no, I don't think you're right here was going to be an INTJ. So I started to dig in with my closer INTJ friends and I asked them like, what's going on here? I mean, I don't really understand. And they reflected that sometimes when it feels like when an idea is kind of being suggested to you, you might say your natural inclination, your natural preference would be like, oh, no, I'm good. Like I don't really need that suggestion. And then maybe later, if we're all lucky, you'll like come back to it and be like, oh, okay, yeah, like that, there's some validity there. But you're not naturally going to be like, oh, tell me more. This is amazing. Like you must be right about me. Does that feel right?
It's completely correct. It's literally everything I'm told. I'm like, I have this steadfast, I don't want to say arrogance, but like belief that I'm like, no, I got this.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way a lot of INTJs are, and that there is a deep need to think it's your own idea. So This used to be a running joke with my former business partner and I, is that, both being INTJs, like there was a fascinating dynamic, but we would have to make each other think it was our idea.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And this, like, I would be like, she now thinks it's her idea. Excellent. So, you have to kind of convince the INTJ that they thought of it. They'll come around eventually because they just need to go through all the reasoning and the logic and kind of validate it and like kind of work through their process that lets them discern if this is the right direction or not.
Right. Well, and I have to imagine as I go, obviously I'm endlessly fascinated by this. I can totally see why that is the most sensical, the best way to go about it as an INTJ, because typically y'all tend to be really freaking smart. And you've probably had so many situations in your life where something, kind of made sense and was suggested to you, but you saw through it. Because you're that natural questioner, you saw through it, you questioned it, and were able to say, yeah, like that doesn't work for me. Like, no. And so that like tendency to question and be an immediate no rather than an immediate yes is actually, I think, one of the best things about what your type does. Because there's no other way to be an INTJ and a questioner and a rebellious person than to do that at first. So I love it. But I think it is interesting how even if it's a good idea technically, kind of got to go through the INTJ ringer to be actually latched onto and be like, okay.
That's it. Perfect. It is the perfect description. I don't think there's like even the simplest thing, like a friend is like, let's go out to dinner. I'm like, It's very rare that I will say immediately a yes. I'm always like, let me think about this.
Yeah.
And sometimes I can move through that kind of process really quickly. Other times I'm literally like, I need 3 weeks to go away and like sit on this. I'll come back to you.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't think it avoids me getting into situations where I'm in over my head or I've made the wrong decision. But let me tell you, there are times I make the wrong decision, and it's because I don't go through those steps. It's because it's an impulse purchase or it's an emotional thing because of something else that's going on that day. And I don't kind of stay true to the way I actually make decisions and the way I actually function on an ongoing basis.
Well, I think regardless of what type anyone is, I think that's a really easy trap to get into. So yeah, it is. But knowing you just kind of, you just highlighted it, knowing what your preferred way to make a decision is important. It doesn't mean that you're always going to utilize it and take full advantage of it, but at least knowing and being self-aware of what a feel-good decision feels like and what a not so good feeling decision feels like, that contrast can help you do that more over time. So I like that. I am curious now, as we've looked at how you're applying your marketing personality type to your marketing strategy, how you approach clients, how you approach your team. Take us into the vision for your brand and your company in the next year. Where are we headed with this?
So it's all about breaking the rules.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things I see for the agency is that there is, and I've written about this, I haven't published it yet, but I feel like there's this evolution happening where anyone familiar with the agency world knows that large agencies are on the decline. That's literally where I grew up in the early stages of my career, and budgets are being rolled back. But then that kind of intersects in this really, really interesting way with the world of work. So I think there's a real opportunity for me and my team to be this different solution and to serve our clients differently. And I've really seen over the last year this incredible evolution in the types of clients we serve and the caliber of clients we serve, and just a willingness with these companies that I never would have thought would be on our client list to work with a smaller player, to work with a virtual team, to, be really, really comfortable and open to the way we function as an agency. And we don't function in the same way a normal agency does. Like we don't have a lot of junior team members. We don't gouge them on price. And I think with Scoob, I see a real opportunity for us to kind of step up and start to step into that role. And then, with Small Business Boss, really, because of what I see happening in the world of business and the world of work, I feel like there's a big opportunity for a lot of service business owners to really step into trying to figure out how to grow their service business and doing it in a way that's, leveraging services and leveraging a team, and not just kind of defaulting to, I have to have a group program or I have to have a course. That's great for the people who want to do that. It works really well for some people. It doesn't work great for other people. And I feel like for those people, I want to be able to model and help them figure out how to do it for them. So that's kind of, lots of rule breaking there, but it all kind of fits together nicely.
Well, I could not support that more, because I speak to so many people kind of getting wooed by the, you do some service stuff, and then, out of what you learn, make a course, and then do a group program. And then maybe you can do like a mastermind or a mentorship program. And it's like this building, it's like this, what seems like a natural building of offerings, but that there are so many different models within what I just outlined. And based on who you are, not all those models are going to feel great. And it's not like you have to have all those offerings to have a successful business at all, at all. So I like how you are zeroing into those people who really are built for and feel best about offering a service. And ultimately, I really love how you're thinking about service-based people who do have their eyes on creating that agency. That's key. So where can the listeners find you online and support this vision? Where do we go?
Smallbusinessboss.co. You can also head on over to Small Business Boss Podcast. And, you can follow Scoob Studios, but unless you're a mid-sized tech company, it's probably not that interesting. So yeah, I'd probably stick with Small Business Boss.
Yeah, I think that most of my current listenership will probably be all into that. So that's at smallbusinessboss.co. You also have a podcast, which if you are a service-based business owner, that podcast needs to be on your subscribe list for sure. Thank you so much for being here. And listeners, go find Maggie. The links to her website and her podcast are in the show notes. Super easy to find. And I'll catch you back here next week on the Marketing Personalities podcast, where we're going to get to hear from an INFJ marketing personality type, Rachel Cook, and how her strategy has shifted since she did a strategy check session with me a few weeks ago. Talk to you then. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Marketing Personalities podcast. Now it's time to connect your marketing strategy to your personality type. Go to marketingpersonalities.com/MPP to download your marketing personality type full report. Use the code MPP at checkout to get $10 off. And that's a super special code for podcast listeners as a way to say thank you for being here. In your full report, you'll learn about your personality type, how it relates to the work you do, what your best marketing strategy includes so you can start implementing it right away, what your worst marketing strategy includes so you can avoid it, and so much more. Go to marketingpersonalities.com/MPP to get your full report and use the code MPP at checkout to receive $10 off your purchase. And one more thing before you skip on to the next podcast. Would you please share this episode with your entrepreneur friends who also need to feel good about their marketing strategies? Take a quick screenshot of your podcast app right now and share it out via text, Facebook, or my favorite, Instagram. Remember to tag me at Marketing Personalities in the photo so I can be sure to send you a huge high five and thank you for sharing the love. This podcast is edited and produced by the Podcast Engineers. They're pretty great, and you can find them at podcastengineers.com. That's all for now. Thanks as always for listening, and I'll catch you back here next week on the Marketing Personalities Podcast. Love ya. Bye.